Today is election day all over the country. And the question we're asking is, have you voted? And if not, do you have a plan to get out to vote today? Closely fought contests across the country will determine the balance of power in Congress, state legislatures, and governorships. For many, the integrity of our election system is also on the ballot. Also, many of us believe democracy is on the ballot, with mainstream media outlets turning the election into an event akin to the Super Bowl, unreliable polls, and even Elon Musk tweeting to hundreds of millions of people to vote Republican. Can Democrats eke out enough votes to maintain the power or maintain their numbers in the House and Senate? And what happens if a billionaire developer disguised as a Democrat becomes mayor of the nation's largest city and one of the country's bluest cities? All of that coming up next with one of the nation's leading voices on social justice and civil rights. Reverend William Barber is in the house.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
I'm super excited today to be sitting down with Reverend William Barber. He is the co-founder of the Poor People's Campaign. They just put out this amazing video called We Vote Fearless. We're going to try to find it. We're going to tweet it out and post it all over social media to make sure everyone gets a chance to see it. Good morning and welcome back, Reverend Barber.
Well, thank you so much, Areva, and I am so glad that you're on the front line with this and pushing these issues out and framing them the way that really they ought to be framed. This is not a Super Bowl event. This is really about the soul of our democracy.
You know, Reverend Barber, I know like me, you've turned on some of these cable networks, and I work with one of them, so I don't want to be too critical about it, but I feel like this whole sport of our elections is harmful to our election process. They have the countdown clock, they have the false equivalency. They want to keep these races close to keep people engaged like they would, two teams going at it in a Super Bowl. What impact do you think the way the media is reporting these elections may have on particularly those voters who aren't, those regular voters, those people we call low propensity voters?
Yeah, I even saw yesterday somebody's now voting on whether they're putting out margins of vote like you do in the casinos. And that's some dangerous stuff. When we talk about a democracy, I think we go to the Constitution. It says the establishment of justice, providing for the common defense and promoting the general welfare of all people, equal protection under the law. What if the media would sit down and say, here are the issues that every politician needs to address? First of all, you've got 140 million poor and low wealth people in this country who are $500 away from economic ruin. What are you going to do about that? You have 55 million people who work for less than a living wage. What if every politician had to answer that question? What are you going to do about that? You have 87 million people uninsured or underinsured. You have 73 million women who are poor who will be hurt by blocking the right for a woman to choose. You have 4 million families that get up every morning and buy unleaded gas and can't buy unleaded water. It seems like we don't want to talk about those issues. And what that does is it turns people off. We've touched 5 million people in the Poor People's Campaign in 50 days. And one of the complaints we hear is they said, nobody's talking to us. The ads seem to only be about women, issues, and January 6th. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying those aren't two top tier, but there should be some added tiers to that. We should be talking about living wage. We should be talking about who's blocked voting rights. We should be talking about who has blocked people's health care so that people understand the real difference, the real policy difference based on who you vote for, because our votes are not really support as much as they are demands for a just society.
Now, such a great point. A friend of mine who was doing some GOTV in Ohio, making phone calls, she said she got a Black woman who was on some kind, I don't know, Social Security, maybe disability. And she said she voted for the Democrats, but she hated the Democrats because she made more money under Trump. And I says, what money is she talking about? And she says, after she drilled down with this voter, turned out she was making reference to the first stimulus check. Right. And when she tried to tell her it was Biden who gave her that second stimulus check and all the other things that Joe Biden has done, she said she just kind of closed her mind to those things, but she was stuck on that first stimulus check. How do you reach those voters, Reverend Barbara, who have heard a talking point or maybe have gotten stuck on that first $1,200 check and they think that because of that, they should be voting for Republican candidates? And in a state like Ohio, that means voting for J.D. Vance for U.S. Senate.
Yeah, somebody who supports destroying democracy, supports violence, supports cutting the Social Security, cutting Medicare, doing away with health care, blocking living wages. You know, we have to tell the whole story. And one of the things I'm concerned about is these consultants that are advising Democratic, particularly the candidates, and telling them, if you just stick with these two issues, and they come up with these talking points, and they sound like robots, rather than speaking to the wholeness of our culture. You know, when the Republicans say, Joe Biden, you created inflation, first of all, attack that. Inflation is a global issue. We're coming out of a pandemic. And yes, during the pandemic, we did spend some money. And guess what we spent it for? To help millions of people who were unemployed. Millions of people who did not have, would have gotten kicked out of their homes. Millions of people who would not have been able to eat. If you show that picture, and then you put a face on all of your policy, in other words, how it affected Americans from Appalachia to Alabama, then you can battle. You know, when I hear people saying the president can't come to my state because he's 40%, well, if you let Trump in the state, why can't Biden come? And Biden ought to come to those states and really tell the story, because maybe the numbers are down because people don't know. People really don't understand what's going on. You know, elections have to be about education. That's why in the old days, we used to talk about voter education, voter registration, and voter mobilization. And that's what we do in the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. We say, look, you need to look at where does a candidate stand when it comes to systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, denial of health care, the war economy, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism and violence. And then you make your decision based on policy, not just based on some false form of promotion that happens too often. When we're spending billions of dollars now, I understand they spent $250 million in Georgia alone on these races to cloud people's mind. And lastly, I know my answer is a little long. We've got to get back to the going door by door, going into people's homes, talking to people. You know, in Pennsylvania and North Carolina and Georgia in 2020, the presidential election was decided in those three states by under 100,000 votes. Do you know there's over 3 million poor and low wealth voters in those three states alone that did not vote? And yet, I don't know anybody that had a plan to reach them, a direct plan to go talk to 3 million people, 60 to 80% of them already registered to vote, already registered, but nobody wants to talk to them. And that's a travesty in this democracy, that we've basically written off poor and low wealth people.
So when you say that to these elected officials, and you have the ears of all of these elected officials at the highest level, and when you say there are 3 million low-income people who are not being talked to, what is their response to you, Reverend Barbara?
The tragedy right now is that most of them, if you listen, Democrat or Republican, you don't even hear them say the word poor or low wealth. You hear Republicans normally blame the poor. Democrats talk about the middle class and those who are trying to get into the American dream. We've gotten stuck in two bad forms of economics, trickle down and neoliberalism. And neither one of them touch the people I'm talking about. And this is what, and the danger in that. In the last election, 50-some million poor and low wealth voters voted. 53% of them voted for Biden and Harris. But that meant 25 plus million didn't vote. Now, how do you just not see that as a target? We have 140 million poor and low wealth people in this country, 43% of the nation. How can you run a campaign and run ads and you don't say anything to them? I mean, directly. That is a problem. We're going to have to keep pushing. I think poor and low wealth people are going to have to decide. We are deciding we're going to make people hear us, because that's the problem. All of these races, well, it's tight and they can't decide who may win today. In every state that's a battleground state, poor and low wealth people make up 45% of the electorate. In every one of those states, upwards of 1 million poor and low wealth people are on the books there who did not vote. And to not go after them, to me, is morally indefensible, constitutionally inconsistent, economically insane and politically inept. And if the swing vote we're looking for is not independence and that the swing vote are poor and low wealth brothers and sisters, low wage workers who work hard every day and who we should be talking to regularly in this process. Okay,
I got two questions for you on that. One, you're right. I'm sitting here thinking it's almost, Reverend Barbara, as if the word poor, low wealth you use, I use the word low income, I often use under-resourced, that word interchangeably. Has that become taboo? Because you're right, we don't see elected officials even using the word poor. Sometimes maybe under-resourced, underserved, we may hear, but has that become taboo to even call people poor in this country?
I think it's become taboo by the politicians. When I talk to poor and low wealth people, they want it to be heard. When we started the Poor People's Campaign, the poor low wealth named it. They said, yes, we wanted to be the poor people's campaign because we want people to know what's happening underneath the flag, what's really going on. We want people to know that there's more than 30 million poor and low wealth people in this country. It's over 140 million, 52% of our children. We need these issues to be discussed. But if both sides are trying to play to the corporate people, if both sides are playing to the corporate leaders, if both sides are scared to talk about living wages and raising minimum wage to $15 because the U.S. Chamber of Commerce doesn't want two things. They don't want a living wage and they don't want full-fledged voting rights that would open up more people to the process. Then you got to decide as a party. You have to decide, are you going to listen to the 1% or the 2% of this country, or are you going to talk to the 43% of this nation who every day work hard? The majority of poor and low wealth people are working people. And so what we're doing is saying, maybe we're going to have to make the leaders hear us. That's what they did in 1965. Lyndon Baines Johnson didn't want to talk about 65 voting rights. He didn't want to talk about that. But the people made it happen. That's why in July, we had a mass poor people's low wage workers assembly marching on Washington to the polls. That's why we touched more than 5 million people in 50 days. We're going to make sure that however this election turns out, the power of poor and low wealth people will be felt and the potential will be seen. And we're going to continue to push, fight. And we're not going to let people intimidate us. This business now, people saying they're going to go to the polls. I've said three things. First of all, remember that people face worse than whatever they're talking about doing. Number two, recognize they wouldn't be trying to intimidate us if we didn't have power. Right. And then resist any intimidation because your right to vote is a God-given right and you should not allow anybody to scare you when it comes to using it.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because we're here in California and it's raining, and we definitely want people to be reminded that a little rain is nothing compared to what people had to endure and to suffer through in order to vote before we got that Voting Rights Act. I want to ask you this, Reverend Barbara. So, okay, look, you and I'm good with word poor. I grew up poor. I claim it every day of the week. Right. So I have no problems acknowledging that. What about those poor and low wealth people that you talked about when you were last on the show, that vote against their best interests? Yeah. Those people that will vote for Republicans, even though, as you said, Republicans are the ones who are talking about reducing, cutting back Social Security. Biden just, gave an increase, the highest increase ever. Social Security is going to go up like 8% in January. But there are still poor people, like the woman on the phone with my friend in Ohio, who will vote for a Republican, even though that Republican is going to enact policies that will detrimentally impact his or her life.
Well, two things about that. Note what you just said. Biden increased Social Security. It's going to be 8% increase in January. We've been screaming, Democrats, from the time this election was going on, should have been just like almost doing it by rote. Did you know Democrats did this? Did you know Democrat did this? Did you know Democrat did this? Secondly, we begged Democrats to have 3 votes before the election to expose people. Another vote on living wage, so that the country could see who doesn't want you to have a raise. Number 2, a vote on voting rights, so the country could see who's really suppressing the vote, doesn't want Black folk, brown folk, Asian, Native, women, so forth, and a vote on women's rights. We said we needed those votes whether they lost them or not. Because the truth of the matter is, one of the problems is Democrats had the opportunity to pass living wages and voting rights. And if it wasn't for those Republicans and 2 renegade Democrats, we would have done that. Many of us argued that at least 2 senators should have stood on that floor and said to Joe Manchin, you don't get our vote for infrastructure until you vote for voting rights and living wages. In other words, we have to play hard ball. Because if you don't, then you leave people open to being confused, right? If you run on living wages and run on voting rights, which Biden and others did, and then that doesn't happen, sometimes what you do gets covered in what did not happen. Now, secondly, however, most poor folks, by the data, do not vote against their own self-interest. We did some serious research with Columbia University, and we found 3 reasons poor and low-wealth voters don't vote. Number 1, nobody talks to them was the number 1 reason. Number 2, transportation and access. Number 3, voter suppression. But we found out that over half of poor and low-wealth voters actually voted for Biden and Harris, and probably more would have if we do more direct outreach. Now, you're always going to have some people that will vote against their interests. But I contend, and what we have seen is that when people don't vote or don't vote for their interests, it's because of not enough clarity, outreach, and direct touching of those persons has happened. Imagine if, for instance, in Georgia, as I said, 1 million poor low-wealth voters did not vote the last time. Imagine if the party said, we're going to have an intentional, direct outreach to those persons, right? And we're going right down the line, and we're going to show how every negative Republican policy has a direct negative impact on their lives as poor and low wealth. Until we do that, we really can't blame people for how they vote, because we've not done the things we need to do to really reach them and touch them. And that's why we have to have the campaign we're having, because we can't wait any longer. I mean, we can't wait on the parties. And the truth is, historically, most of the time, the movement gets it before the party gets it.
Amen to that. Reverend Barber, what about those efforts we saw in Georgia? We saw Black Voters Matter. We saw the Black Voter Project. We saw all these voting projects in Georgia increase the number of voters in the last presidential election. They say voter turnout is up in Georgia,
Sure.
but we still see Herschel Walker and Reverend Warnock in this ridiculously, insanely close race. We see Stacey Abrams' number still trailing behind Brian Kemp. So even with that massive outreach and voter registration, those races are still so close.
But notice what you said, we increased Black voters, and Black voters a lot of time are voting because somebody has tried to take their vote, so they're turning out. What I'm saying is, for instance, the Poor People's Campaign, we reached 350-some thousand poor and low wealth voters in our effort to text and touch and email since September. That's all people, because you can't just look at the Atlanta turnout. You've got to look at the Albany turnout and the rural turnout in Georgia. And remember, when Raphael, Senator Warnock, won, he ran on living wages. He said, if you elect me, I'm gonna get you $15 minimum wage. When the Democrats did not follow through on that, he ran saying, I'm going to pass voting rights. They disempowered him being able to go back and say, look what I did. See, people look at what you do. Secondly, we've allowed Herschel Walker, and the media has a lot of fault in this, I believe, because we don't unpack. We make it like it's a game. You know, there really should be charts on these candidates. If you elect Herschel Walker, this is what's going to happen to you if you don't have healthcare. This is what's going to happen to you if you have low wages. And then here's Warnock. We should have charts. But also, when Walker is allowed, as you remember, Democrats, when it was found out that he may have paid for this abortion, immediately we called him a hypocrite. A lot of us as theologians were screaming, saying, no, don't do that, don't do that. That's not what makes him a hypocrite. What makes him a hypocrite is that he wants people now to have mercy on him, but he doesn't want to have mercy in his public policy. What makes him a hypocrite is that he's claiming to be a Christian, but he's voting against everything Jesus would support. You see, we have to expose the real hypocrisy of folk. And so in some ways, the way Herschel Walker talks, and he talks that drawl and all of that, Some people get attracted and say, he's one of us. Well, the way you say he's not one of you is to say he might talk like that, but let's look at what he's going to do to your income. Let's look at what he will do to your health care. Lastly, we have to remember that the South is still reeling from the Southern strategy. We broke through in 2008 with Obama, but make no mistake, Trump did not make this. It was created way before Trump. And the Southern strategy's intent was to split Black and white people and brown people from each other, to make white poor people think that Black folk getting something was taken from them. If you know that's their plan, then you have to go after it. You have to challenge it. I remember when Biden went to Atlanta to talk about voting rights, and some of us were screaming, don't go to Atlanta and just speak to a Black audience about voting suppression. Go there and talk about how voter suppression will hurt Black people, will hurt students, will hurt the disabled, will hurt the poor, will hurt the women. In other words, expand our arguments. Don't limit it. Don't have a group of issues you're talking to Black folk, then another group you're talking to over here. Disaggregate the pain of every negative Republican or extremist, because my grandfather's a Republican, so I don't like to call him Republican. My granddad was a Lincoln Republican. He wasn't this kind of Republican. But open up the pain, disaggregate it, show people how extreme this stuff is. And we have to do that, especially in the South. That's the only way we can win. We won in North Carolina. Last I'll say this, in 2008, Obama lost on election day. People don't know that, but he won doing same-day registration and early voting. The movement won same-day registration and early voting before he came there. And then we committed to put a broad, diverse coalition out into the electorate, and he won. The Republicans came along later and gerrymandered. We beat them in the courts. Remember that? We beat them on all the voter suppression, but it took 4 or 5 years. We're in a fight for the very heart and soul of this democracy. And I will say this lastly, I don't believe that we're going to solve it until we raise up the people in the valley. Poor and low wealth people are the key swing vote in every state. That's where our focus needs to be. If we focus there, we will overrun some of these folk and none of these elections will be close.
So you say, Reverend Barber, that Southern strategy, and we think about it as, being very pervasive and a real thing in the South. But let's talk about some of these northern races that are equally close. We've got a governor in New York who is close in a race with an election denier. We have a Democratic U.S. Congresswoman, Karen Bass, who's in a close race with a billionaire developer that became a Democrat by checking a box 18 days before he announced his run for mayor of Los Angeles. And you have Democrats in Los Angeles, people who loved Obama, people who fought and stood in solidarity with Obama and the Democratic Party, who are now endorsing this billionaire developer who is not by any stretch of anybody's imagination a Democrat. How do we make sense of what's happening in these states, California, New York, not the South?
Well, remember, the goal of the Southern strategy was not just the South. They said if they did it right, they could spread what they call positive polarization. That's what Pat Buchanan and Phillips, who advised Richard Nixon, they said we can test it in the South, but we'll be able to use it in New York. We'll be able to split people in New York. We'll be able to split people in the Midwest, and they have, because the argument is basically, as Pat Buchanan said to Richard Nixon, all you have to do is find out who hates who and split them. And that's why I say Trump inherited a system. He didn't make it. He inherited a 50-year-old plan that's been in place ever since the 60s to divide and conquer, positive polarization, and it's out of control. However, look at all those states again and look at the number of poor and low wealth voters who did not vote. I will keep going back to that, whether it's in New York or California, and then ask this question: have those candidates, those Democratic candidates, made a direct appeal to poor and low wealth voters? Did they put massive ground game in those poor and low wealth communities? Did they speak directly to poor and low wealth voters and say, if you elect me, here's what's going to happen to wages and healthcare. One of the things that's hurting Democrats now, and I still am praying and hoping that we see some major change tonight. But if we don't, and if folk don't win, we just have to keep fighting. That's what democracy is about. But I'm not so much fighting for party as for policy. When they allowed Manchin and this lady out of Arizona, Sinema, to block, think about what they blocked. If it hadn't been for them, Kamala Harris would have been the deciding vote on raising the wages for 55 million people. 43% of Black people would have come up out of poverty. She would have been a deciding vote on voting rights, expanding and protecting voting rights. She would have been the deciding vote on expanding child tax credit that would have kept 60% of children out of poverty. Those three denials by the trickery in the Congress, and particularly in the Senate, have hurt because people voted last time believing that those things would happen. And I said that to Senator Schumer, and some of them would say things like, well, let us get this infrastructure first. They told some civil rights leaders to do that, and some of us didn't agree. No. You don't do infrastructure roads first and leave the infrastructure of your democracy broken. You don't do infrastructure of roads first and leave people having to ride to work every day, wondering if they're going to have to choose paying for their rent or paying for their medicine. You do it all at one time, and you play real hard ball. They kept telling us we can't do it. But even at a larger point, these governors, I would ask them, and I hope they could hear it without getting offended. If you win tonight, take an honest look at why it was so close, and then take an honest look at how many poor and low wealth folk were left off the playing field. And then decide, if you win, that it will never happen again, that we're never going to have any more elections where we put all this money in TV, which we have to do, but we don't put resources in the ground game, particularly to reach poor and low income voters. There's a data stat that we did. We did a report called Unleashing the Giant, the Sleeping Giant. And it showed that in the battleground states, if just 19%, no more than 20% of poor and low wealth voters who did not vote were pushed to vote, not 30%, or just 20%, it could fundamentally shift any election and close the margin of victory. It's 4% in Florida, 7% in Georgia, 4% in Pennsylvania, 1% in Michigan. It's less than 10% in New York and California. I mean, the margins that are there are not insurmountable. The problem is we have not made the kind of direct appeal we need to 43% of this nation.
Well, it sounds like not only the direct appeal, but we've got to follow through on the promises. Like you said, Reverend Warnock can't go back into Georgia saying, I delivered on those things I ran for 2 years ago, because people are watching. People do expect their elected officials to do what they say they're going to do when they're running. I know I got to let you go.
Especially, watch this, especially when 50% of your workforce makes less than a living wage. And you ran saying you were going to do it, then your own party blocked you from doing it. That's not smart politics for the party, and we have to do better, right? It's
not. Last minute words, Reverend Barber, for anybody. First of all, we want people to know some states you can register and vote today. So you can't have that excuse that you're not registered. So you have that opportunity. Some people believe I didn't vote in the primaries, I can't vote in the general. That's not true either. You can vote today. What is that message, Reverend Barber, that you would give to anybody who's sitting at home, hasn't voted, but has an opportunity to do so? How do we just, give them that last minute push?
Vote fearlessly, get up and vote. Don't worry about personality, worry about party. You're not trying to vote for perfection. Look at both parties and see which party is closest to what you need in your life to be in a sound democracy, which party you can push if you vote for them that will grow. But the thing mostly, do not sit down. This is really not about you voting because people fought for it in the past. This is about this country's present and future. It really, really is. whether or not we're going to have people in office who are completely against forward progress, or whether we're going to have folk in office who are at least trying that we can push in the right direction. This is a policy battle. It's a battle for the heart and soul of this country. Women's rights is on the ballot, living wages is on the ballot, health care is on the ballot, voting rights is on the ballot, your very life is on the ballot. Get up, organize your votes, and get it done.
I'm so glad you said, Reverend Barber, eloquently stated, this is not about perfection. So many people can run down everything they hate about a candidate and they're losing sight of what you said. Who is the party that you can at least push, that you can expect, at least expect to be fighting for things that are important to you? And who is the party that has fought to block everything from that child income tax credit? That was one of the most incredible measures we've seen in a long time to lift people out of poverty.
That's right.
And the Republicans killed it. I mean, that was just disastrous. And I hate that we're not talking more about that, because talk about low wealth and poor people being motivated to vote. That's enough, I would think, to cause somebody. I mean, that was real money.
And imagine if the media had done that, not one time, but over and over again. All I want the media to do is tell the truth. I don't even want the media to be subjective. Just don't let these people run and only have to talk about one or two issues. Make them have to deal with what's really going on in people's lives. And what if we had a real national conversation on one party coming out of a pandemic says no to 60% of the children in this country, and another party says yes? Yeah.
I mean, that alone seemingly should drive millions of people to the polls. Thank you so much, Reverend Barber. I want to make sure people know your book. You have two, We Are Called to Be a Movement, and the third, Reconstruction, How a Moral Movement is Overcoming the Politics of Division and Fear. And that video, We Vote Fearless, we're going to post it all over social media. Make sure we get that video out to as many people, because we got hours left in this day that people can go to the polls and vote. We so appreciate your voice on these issues. We appreciate the action that the Poor People's Campaign is taking and reminding us. I mean, that's a startling, shocking number, 43% of people in this country who are poor or low wealth. And if we're not talking to those people, shame on us, as you said.
That's exactly right. And inside of that number is the hope. Because if you flip that over, that means that's 43% of people that could vote for you. If you got 87 million people who without health care, flip that over. That means you have 87 million people that could vote and could stand up. And we can no longer just assume or take for granted this powerful economic and moral block of people in this country. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Reverend Barber. Always a pleasure to see you, my friend. Be well out there. Keep on fighting that good fight. And I love that you ended on a positive note. There is hope. There is hope in those numbers. Again, good to see you, my friend. All right, my next guest is Colin Seaberger. He's a senior advisor for communication at Center for American Progress. Good morning and welcome, Colin. You've been listening to Reverend Barber, who's just so insightful, so many astute points that he made. So I'll just ask you, as someone who works on communication, someone who has been inside of Democratic campaigns, you've worked for a senator, why is it that our Democratic Party is not talking directly to those 43% of people who Reverend Barber described as poor and low wealth?
Good morning, or I guess I should say good afternoon, Areva. It's great to see you. Happy Election Day. I think at the end of the day, really what this election comes down to is a contrast in two visions: who sees, listens, and will deliver for voters. On the one hand, you've got the Democratic Party that's proven that they'll take on special interests. They voted to crack down on big oil for price gouging consumers at the pump. They voted to take on big pharma, empowering Medicare to negotiate prescription drug costs and make corporations finally pay their fair share. On the other hand, you've got this MAGA Republican Party that has called inflation a gold mine, that says that they're going to hold the economy hostage if Democrats don't agree to cutting Social Security and Medicare. And that they're coming for our elections, the very foundation of our country, our democracy, in saying that they're going to throw out the will of the people, ignore whatever voters say, because their power is more important. So really, at the end of the day, what voters are making a decision on is who they trust to look out for their interest. And that work never ends. right?
I hear you saying that, but I saw this headline in the Wall Street Journal talking about white suburban women. I think we have this headline saying that white suburban women were worried about the economy, and that was going to basically cause them to bring Republicans back to Congress. So you just framed it as the party that's going to destroy democracy and the party that's going to try to, move the country forward. But white suburban, I'm going to call them educated. I don't know what their education level is, but I'm assuming they are educated. They are mistakenly believing that somehow the Republicans have the answer to the economy when we know that's far from the truth. The inflation, as Reverend Barber said, anyone that knows anything about economics knows that inflation is a global problem, not one that can be fixed by the Democrats or the Republicans. And we know that the Republicans in office have never done anything to help working class people, suburban people like these white people, unless these women, unless they're ultra rich, then maybe they do benefit under Trump, or Trump-like candidates. But how do you make sense of that, Colin?
Well, I wouldn't try to read too much into a small subsample of a single poll, but you are right. Democrats are the party that has plans to help the American people, and the Biden administration, Democrats in Congress are delivering on those promises. We've had more than 10.3 million jobs created under President Biden. That's a record number of jobs for a president's first 21 months or so. We have, unemployment at nearly a 50-year low, record low unemployment for Latino Americans. The GDP is growing. We're not in a recession. Gas prices are down, about $1 over the course of the past several months. Still too high, and that's why we need to take on, big oil that wants to price gouge consumers that every single Republican in the House voted against. And at the end of the day, what are the plans that Republicans have put on the table for the economy? Breach the debt limit, increase prices for everybody by making inflation even worse. Unless Democrats agree to cutting Social Security and Medicare, that's going to make it harder for people to retire. That's going to make it harder for people who live paycheck to paycheck to get by. That's hardly a choice, but it's important for us to keep getting the word out there. And it's important for voters to take Republicans at their word when they say this is what their plans are. Back in 2015.
Oh, let me stop you, because I agree that Wall Street Journal, which is a very conservative newspaper to begin with, and that poll could be a small sample, but these races are close. In Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer is in a close race with an election denier. In New York, Hochul is in a tough fight with an election denier. So it's not as if, there's this message about, 10 million jobs, lower gas prices, record unemployment rates are causing people to reject these Republicans. Arizona has 4 people, 4 of their top Republican candidates are they're election deniers. They're deniers about January 6th. These people are dangerous, but yet they are, in some cases, leading in the polls.
Look, you are right. This is a very divided country along partisan lines. But I think, really the question right now, given the historical headwinds that the president's party typically faces in the first midterm election, the real question is why Republicans are actually underperforming those historical trends. And part of the reason why that is because today's Republican Party, we've never seen a modern political party in America as extreme as today's Republican Party is, that wants to throw out votes, that's willing to rip away 50-year-old rights, ban abortion with no exceptions for rape, incest, the life of the mother. And really, that's why you're seeing Democrats, holding their own, about tied in polling. Yesterday's NBC News poll came out, showed Democrats and Republicans tied at 47% among registered voters. Democrats actually having a 1-point edge, 48-47 among likely voters. And part of the reason why that is because, as President Biden and Democrats in Congress continue to get the word out about everything that they're doing, the public is actually even more educated about what Republicans stand for. And that's why their favorability is even lower than Democrats in Congress, than President Biden. And let's also be clear, it's not uncommon for, presidents in the first midterm to, be challenged by declining approval ratings. It happened to President Obama. It happened to President Trump. So this is not a unique feature of these elections. That
No,
said,
I agree with you. But one thing, Colin, you talk about those headwinds. Yes, historically, the party in power in the White House loses in the Congress. This whole notion that we need checks and balance in our political process. But this election is different in somewhat very many ways, Colin, because some of these people, these aren't the Republicans that were running 10 years ago. These people deny, 70% of Republicans even deny that Biden is, or they question whether Biden is the legitimate president of the United States. These people running, these Republicans in Arizona, they are running on the big lie. So we're not talking about what used to be fiscally conservative Republicans, Christian values, although we know that's a bunch of BS. But we did not have these extremists, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who may become chair of the oversight committee in Congress, and they've already talked about impeaching Biden, impeaching his son. So again, I think the closeness of this race is still boggling the minds of so many people, because they're not running against, the George Bush Republican. They're running against the Marjorie Taylor Greene Republican.
that's exactly right. And, it's why Republicans are the ones who need to look in the mirror and reckon with what's become of their party. Will the Republican Party really embrace Carrie Lake, whose closing argument in this election is attacking former Senator John McCain, who was the Republican presidential nominee in 2008, and touting her support for white nationalists like State Senator Wendy Rogers? Is that really, who the Republican Party is going to, who voters at large are going to say, I want to be represented by them? So, do we want to send Doug Mastriano to the governor's mansion in Pennsylvania, the same guy who was at the insurrection on January 6th? We have to really look inside ourselves and say, what kind of country do we want to be? Do we want to be a country that is making progress on the kitchen table issues that matter so much to the American people's pocketbooks, things like taking on big pharma to empower Medicare to negotiate drug prices and bringing the cost of prescription drugs down, going after the price gougers at the pump, taking on corporate consolidation in the food sector? Or do we want to be a party that's attacking democracy, that's banning abortion, again, in cases of rape, incest, the life of the mother, taking away 50-year-old rights that people have long relied on, that thinks inflation is a gold mine? That's really the question that's before voters today. And it's why I think Democrats are actually going to overperform historical expectations.
I am so encouraged by what you say. I hope we are the kind of country that does choose to move forward and support, our democratic system. I just worry that the Fox News channel, which has, dwarfs the other news channels, has, peddled these falsities, these falsehoods, these, big lies to so many people that you hear people repeating them over and over again. And we're not often having conversations with rational people about facts. We're having conversations with people about conspiracy theories. We're having conversations with people who believe in QAnon, who believe that, Joe Biden is not the president, that the election was stolen from him. Ron Johnson, who says the folks on January 6th, I don't even call them folks, the terrorists, were well behaved and stayed behind the rope line. So you're not oftentimes even having a conversation with someone that you can, talk to rationally, because people have become so irrational in their politics. That's what I think scares me the most.
Yeah, you're totally right. Like, take the issue of crime, right, which Republicans have spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to warp the minds of the American electorate. I mean, let's be clear. Homicides have gone up in this country under Donald Trump in 2020, 28%, but they went up for gun homicides 35%. So we know that guns specifically are actually fueling the violent crime that our communities are plagued by, in that it's worse in red states. You know, you can't be tough on crime.
They refuse to do anything about sensible gun laws.
That's exactly right.
About crime, but they won't talk about getting guns off the street. They want to put more guns in school, but they won't talk about keeping kids safe in school. And they want to go, and they're not just want to, they are using those racist tropes to paint Democrats as being quote unquote soft on crime, and to conjure up images of crime being associated with Black people and brown people. And somehow the tough white law and order legislator is going to crack down on crime because they're going to arrest more people and lock them up and throw away the key. And sadly, Colin, that message, even in a liberal city like LA, has been catching traction. People in LA in this horribly close mayor's race are telling me they like the billionaire developer because he's going to be tough on crime. You know how he's going to be tough on crime? He's going to put 1,500 more cops on the street. And guess where those 1,500 cops are going to go? They're going to go in the Black neighborhoods. They're going to go in the brown neighborhoods. We're going to see an increase in racial profiling. We're going to see an increase in racial, encounters with the police that lead to the deaths of Black and brown people. And it's not going to make the city any safer. That's not how you solve crime. No criminal is sitting at home thinking, oh, he just put 1,500 police on the street, so I think I won't commit that crime. He's not talking about going into neighborhoods and doing gang intervention programs and after school programs and putting jobs, living wage jobs in those communities. But white West Siders, which is where affluent white people in our city live, they hear law and order, tough on crime. They get the images of who's committing all the crime. And of course, they're Black and brown men, mostly. And they say, that's my guy, even though I'm a registered Dem who stood in solidarity with Obama, Biden, Clinton, every Democrat. I've been to the White House for parties, they want to be, those kind of Democrats. How do we make sense of that?
Look, everyone has a right to feel safe in their communities, and we shouldn't rest until that's the case. But, the fact is you can't be tough on crime. You talk about, you talk about the mayor's race in LA, but you look all over the country. Places like Georgia, Brian Kemp, right, signed into law a permitless carry bill that allows anybody pretty much to carry a gun wherever, whenever they want. And these are specific policies that are actually opposed by law enforcement because they put their officers in danger. The data shows that they're found to increase violent crime 13 to 15%. Increase homicides. And so, you can't be tough on crime or say that you back the blue and be soft on gun safety. And that's why you see, who's doing the work to protect our people. That's why you see, there are a few facts that you should consider. 8 of the 10 states with the highest murder rates have Republican governors.
Yes.
Murder rates are 40% higher in red states than blue states. Gun deaths are almost twice as high in red states. It's very clear what's driving this problem. And there's only one party that's proven that they're willing to take on the gun lobby and actually can deliver results. And that's Democrats all over the country. We've seen it in Congress. We delivered the bipartisan.
You can't be tough on crime and soft on gun control laws. And we see so many of these, Trump supporters are also supporting the insurrectionists that were cracking the heads of the law enforcement officers who were out there doing their jobs as law enforcement. So the level of hypocrisy with these candidates, is really nauseating. Colin, I got to let you go. What's your last, pitch to these voters who, may be in that group of those white women in the suburbs who somehow think the Republicans have the solution for the economy, or those voters who are saying, I don't care, they're all the same, Democrats and Republicans, they're all crooked, none of them do anything. They bought into this our election as a sport. And so, they may be sitting it out. Just say, I'm gonna watch it on television. I'll phone it in. What do you say to those voters?
I'd say that this is an unprecedented election. That's a choice. It's a choice between extremism, ripping away people's rights, taking away their benefits, and progress. Democrats are delivering on their campaign promises, have created more than 10 million jobs, and are focused on the issues that keep families up at night. Things like making childcare more affordable, making sure our kids can go to good schools and aren't being defunded to fund scholarships for rich kids to go to private school. These are the issues that Democrats are focused on. Republicans are focused on relitigating elections past, talking about overturning votes in the future, and launching baseless investigations into anybody who disagrees with them. And one party is going to be focused on delivering for you, another party is going to be focused on delivering for themselves in shoring up their own political benefit.
Yeah, such a great point. Thank you so much for joining. So much at stake. I hope people, don't wake up tomorrow
Gotta
or
get out there.
week, or 2 months from now when they start debating Social Security and cutting it. And I don't care if you're black, white, red, or green, you probably paid into Social Security and you're probably depending on getting some of that as a form of your retirement. And if you're voting for Republicans, you're putting your retirement at stake. You're putting your parents' retirement. I hope you got a spare room in your house because your mama, your daddy, your grandparents may be coming to live with you when their Social Security gets cut. We just got to keep drumming, beating that drum over and over again, Colin.
That's exactly right. I will just, to crystallize this point, Republicans spent 2010 to 2016 running on eliminating the Affordable Care Act that ensured health coverage for tens of millions of Americans, protected people from pre-existing conditions, made sure that insurance companies couldn't put a lifetime cap on the benefits for your health insurance. And they got one vote short of making that happen. We know every candidate that's on the ballot today is just 1,000 votes, one vote short of potentially changing the course of history. And so that's exactly right. There is an urgency here. Lives are really on the line, and it's important that people go out and vote today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me, Colin. And we're going to
Thanks,
keep
Areva.
beating that drum and fighting that good fight and hoping that we maintain those numbers in the House. We pick up a couple of seats in the Senate, and we keep doing the work of moving this country forward rather than taking this country backwards. Again, thank you for joining me. I want to thank Reverend Barbara and Colin for joining me on this very important Election Day show. Wow, I don't think we can say it enough times how important it is for everyone, no matter where you are in this country, to get out and vote. I spent the weekend rolling across the city of Los Angeles, and Los Angeles is a really big city, on a bus with Karen Bass, stumping for her for mayor of Los Angeles with union leaders, members of the Carpenters Union who were out in full force, with Youth for Bass, high school students, college students, young adults who were stumping, some their first campaign for Karen Bass, with celebrities like Alfre Woodard, who is the most amazing and incredible social justice warrior, who came in from out of town to spend 2 days on this bus. We were stopping throughout Los Angeles, Boyle Heights, Echo Park, San Pedro, the West Side, Mar Vista, Northridge, Sherman Oaks, trying to talk to voters, talking to volunteers, talking to folks who were knocking on doors to deliver a message that if you want to move forward in this city, and this is a message for our country as well, you've got to vote for those people with a proven track record. It's appalling to me that billionaire developer Rick Caruso is in this race as close as he is to Karen Bass. And don't tell me anything about him being a businessman, him being a developer. He knows how to build stuff. He has not built one single unit of affordable housing in the city of Los Angeles. He's not even had an affordable housing unit in his luxury buildings. He's not invested in the city of Los Angeles. He knows nothing about governing this city, what it's going to take to bring a city like LA that is so racially polarized together. He's not worked in Black and brown communities throughout this city. He's not had to do the work of bringing our county board of supervisors together with our city council, with our state legislature, with our US government to find solutions for the difficult problems that we're having in Los Angeles, like the problem of homelessness. 40% of the people on the streets of LA who are homeless are Black people, the majority of them Black and brown people. Why would anyone elect a mayor to address the homeless issue who has no track record of dealing with Black people and finding problems for Black people? Do you think the 40% of Black people that are homeless in the city of Los Angeles are going to be able to work with a guy who's not spent a minute working on issues that are pertinent to low wealth and poor Black people, as Reverend Barber calls them? In contrast, Karen Bass has spent her life working with low wealth and poor people and finding solutions for folks in South Los Angeles, working on those issues that matter to poor African Americans, poor Latinos, building one of the most multiracial and multi-ethnic organizations in the state that has continued to do the work on the ground. So when people say they're sick of homeless people, you're really saying you're sick of those homeless Black people in LA. And if you really want to do something about it, then you need to elect a mayor who has a track record of building trust and working in those communities. So I say this to all of my Democrats in LA who have all of a sudden forgotten that they're Democrats, who are all lovey-dovey with Biden, Obama, Michelle, want to be, the woke liberals, but who are voting for a guy that checked a box 18 days before the election to say he's a Democrat. Don't roll with the Democrats when it's to your advantage, but then abandon us when we have a candidate who has worked as hard as Karen Bass and who has the kind of expertise and experience as she does to be the mayor. And if we wake up tomorrow and Rick Caruso is the mayor and he's trying to get those 40% of Black homeless people off the streets of LA and it doesn't work, which it won't work because his plan is ridiculous. The LA Times has called it ridiculous. Don't be upset. You will have yourselves to thank. And I just say to folks around the country who are voting, we can't convince you enough to vote for Democratic candidates by telling you all the things that Joe Biden has done and what the Republicans are planning to do if they take over the Congress and the Senate. I don't know how many times we can tell you, but it's very clear that if Republicans like Kevin McCarthy becomes the Speaker of the House and he puts Marjorie Taylor Greene as a chairperson over a committee, this country is not going to do anything to improve your economics. It's not going to do anything to improve your living wage, to improve your ability to buy a house, to go to college, to take out a loan, to buy a house or to buy a business. We will be stuck in gridlock. We will be stuck in needless and meritless investigations of Joe Biden's son, who has nothing to do with our government. So you are fooling yourselves when you say Republicans can turn this country around. The country is already on path to solving some of the biggest problems ever. And it's on that path because of Democrats. So I just encourage everyone, go out and vote blue. Be safe out there. And remember, we're all in this together.